My friends, welcome, and thank you for signing up for Embodied Anatomy Mapmaking for Somatic Practitioners. This is Module 1, which is the first of two pre-modules before our time together. So, the purpose of this video is just to help clarify the last exercise in the handout that you're about to receive. So in the handout, we're going to talk about symbolic map making. And then in Module 2, we'll go on to neurocentric map making. So in terms of symbolic map making, it's really important to begin with terms. What do we mean by embodiment? What are we trying to seek in embodiment practice? So a quick section on that, you'll see it in the handout. And then it's useful to cycle through some body maps, symbolic maps of the self, ways of sorting the felt sense or guiding activity in the body that have existed in history. So we have a few examples for us to cycle through, and as we look at each of those images that's in your handout, take a moment and just see what it does to your present moment felt sense. See what it does to your sense of cause and effect in the body. And then lastly, I want to inventory the maps, the symbolic body maps that we currently use in practice, and the ones that we're curious about learning to use. And so for that last one, you'll see on the second to last page of the handout, you'll see a series of boxes. And what I'd like you to do is, these are each categories of maps of the body. They're not exhaustive. You could certainly make your own boxes, your own categories. But as a starting point, think about a day in the life of your embodiment practice, whether it's with yourself or with another person. And when we think about symbolic schemata for the body, ways of dividing the body, of relating parts of the body to the self, or the self to the whole body, we have some different categories. We have anatomical maps, the kind you'd see in a dissected anatomical atlas or a fancy computer-generated anatomy. These are used throughout healthcare, but they are symbolic maps, right? They're representational. They don't show the whole. They are selective simplifications of nature's impossible complexity. There are naturalistic maps. That's to say, metaphors where we compare the body to something in nature, like a river or a flower or something like that. There are sort of material or color or textural maps of the body. I recently had a teacher use the example of pouring warm olive oil through the limbs and into the pelvic bowl and breathing with that image of warm olive oil. That's a material, textural, color kind of map of the body, way of representing the felt sense. There are architectural or sculptural maps, things that compare us to structures that we've built in the world, things we have shaped with our hands and with our minds. And likewise, we can sort of use that same process, either neurologic or cultural, of shaping, building, imagining things, and use that to navigate our felt sense, right? There are craft and technological body maps. So comparing your body to an engine, or comparing your body to a loom, or something like that. All sorts of objects of craft, objects of technology, things that we have made work for us. In the same way we can sometimes make work our felt sense. A meditation where you imagine your normal gaze being the outward-looking mirror of a mirrored camera. And then you just flip the mirror and you look in. That's a technological metaphor, right? There are musical metaphors abounding. You compare yourself to a resonating instrument. You compare yourself to a vibrating string. You compare yourself to a tonal series, or different parts of the self to a tonal series. Musical metaphors. There are certainly sort of affective and emotional maps, places where people feel things. If someone says, I feel disgust, we say, where do you feel disgust? Where does it distribute? What's the shape of it in you, right? Affective and emotional maps. And then lastly, we have sort of energetic and spiritual maps. These are about either the felt sense of some energy, like, vibration or heat or magnetism or electricity, or sort of in a spectrum with the vitalistic drive to seek something, to connect with something, to represent something, to be the vessel for something, right? So you'll see lots of pre-modern body maps that are this, but they're also many other things, right? So these divisions are certainly not always thus divided, either in the modern or the ancient age, but it's nice to sort of like sort these out. If you have extra boxes, feel free to take a new page and draw more in. But what I'd like you to do, and be light with this exercise, no need to be exhaustive. I just want to get you thinking about where you're at and where you want to grow, is to take each of these, just ponder it, and think about your embodiment practice, whether it's teaching another or working with yourself. Think about the metaphors and schemata and symbolic representations of the body that you use, even if it's a muscle-bound diagram on a gym machine. That's a body map, right? So for me, just doing this exercise on the whiteboard, here's what I came up with in a very breezy way for my daily practice. Anatomically, well, I teach anatomy. This is a world I live in a lot, right? But just as a quick example, in purple and in solid boxes, I said, I think a lot in practice about nerve fascia representations of the body. I think a lot about how nerves connect things, how they slide within things, how they tension and balance, and how they interface with the fascial system. So I think about that a lot. That's what I see in front of my eyes when I look at a body. It's both anatomical and it's naturalistic in a way. To think about nerves and fascia, you really think a lot about the ecosystem that they're a part of. I also think a lot about embryologic layers, ways in which we formed ourselves and how those divisions persist in the adult. That's very anatomical, pre-anatomical, but it's also got a lot of material textural distinctions. Different layers of the embryo feel and behave differently under mechanical stress. So I have a lot of this juicy material content in my embryologic maps. Right? Naturalistically, I also sometimes use a tree. I often use a tree in practice, just especially in my own meditation practice. Something about rooting and lofting and growing toward something and centering yourself while things grow out from you. That's very helpful for me. So that's a solid map that I use. One thing I'm curious about, I once heard Thich Nhat Hanh say, sit like a mountain. And I thought, man, that's a badass metaphor, sit like a mountain. I have to say I haven't used it very much in practice thus far, but it's in there. I'm curious about it. I want to embody mountainness more. So that's an example of the kind of thing that you want to think about putting a dotted line around, like an aspirational body map, something you've not quite embodied yet, right? More examples as we go through. Material, textural. I oftentimes talk about the body as comprised of water balloons. This relates a bit to the embryologic layer bit. Water balloon is both about the material, the texture, and it's a made thing, right? And so it connects to that. And sometimes water balloon relates to the sense of being a resonant cavity. And that is really a musical, an affective, a technologic, and an energetic map. And so these are really interesting connections. So, a given map can fall under any or all of these. I sometimes talk about pendulum. If I have someone swing their arm or their leg, or let their head hang during a downward dog, pendulum and pendulation. Sometimes in trauma work, many different somatic practices will talk about pendulating between one state and another, one kind of a resource and a challenge, right? Thinking of the pendulum, that's a technological or a crafty metaphor. Something about the image of that gives us access to a process that we wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And so that's what we're thinking about. You know, the last thing that I didn't talk about is just something, actually during this exercise, I just had the image come into my mind of a glass atrium. I've never used this in practice. I don't know how I'd use this, but something about like, it's a sunny day today, and something about feeling my body as some kind of spacious vessel that light can pour into and warm. And then it's lush, maybe with some green plants on the inside. That felt really generative for me. So try this exercise out on your own after having looked at some of those images in the handout. And then get ready for Module 2, where we're going to look at the neuroscience and developmental aspect of the felt sense and see if we can derive some best practices, some key takeaways from that end of the spectrum. And then when we get together on Saturday, we're going to mash it all together. So have a great week. Have fun with this. Bye.